The second thing I wanted to talk about today, I just simply have to. And this is not a very pleasant story either. But Phyllis Bennis wrote it for Counterpunch. If you're not familiar with that magazine and or that website, you should be. Miss Bennis' most recent book is entitled Understanding ISIS and the New Global War on Terror, a primer. And what she's addressing here in this article she wrote for Counterpunch is the thousands of desperate migrants, mostly from Central America, who are now stuck at the U.S.-Mexico border. And most of these migrants are either families or unaccompanied children. We've seen this on television over and over and over recently. And of course, the filthy, stinking Christian fascists are just having a field day trying to dump all this on Joe Biden. But here's the inner part of that. Despite their legal rights to apply for asylum, which is what these people are doing, U.S. officials are turning away huge numbers. The claim being that, well, we have all these restrictions because of the pandemic. I'm not denying the claim. I'm just saying that's what they're saying. But thousands of kids remain, and they're held in these crowded border detention facilities because they're waiting transfer to Department of Health and Human Services facilities that themselves are full to bursting. Now, the situation obviously is terrible, horrifying for these children, their families. But dealing with it isn't rocket science. As Phyllis Bennis points out, the government should authorize emergency spending to expand and build new facilities immediately, hire social workers, hire health care providers, hire teachers to care for these kids, along with an expanded team of family reunion workers. Why aren't we doing this? Phyllis writes, quote, here in the wealthiest country on earth, we should know how to care for influxes of desperate people. Just ask the teams who welcomed, cared for, and arranged placement for 131,000 Vietnamese refugees in the United States in 1 year, 1975. You know what's missing right now? The political will. Now, when you look at the global picture, Ms. Bennis points out the situation on our border starts to look much more manageable. When you compare what we're dealing with what they're dealing in Myanmar, the Muslim people who are fleeing and heading for Bangladesh, or when you look at the Uyghur ethnic group in China that are trying to get away from this insane fucking dictator Xi Jinping. I mean, all over the place. The Palestinian refugees who are crowded into Syria and Lebanon. Well, not Syria anymore because, I'm sorry, that country's been destroyed, but Jordan and Lebanon. But our problem, let's stay here. First of all, there's a massive displacement crisis globally. More than 84 million people, Ms. Bennis reports, including 34 million children, have been forced from their homes because of war, violence, economic collapse, or climate disasters. And among these 80 million people forced from their homes, 26 million are refugees who have been forced out of their own country. And another 4 million are seeking asylum somewhere. Second point, the world's top refugee hosts that allow people to come in are mostly poorer countries. Here's a fact. More than 2/3 of refugees come from just 5 countries: Afghanistan, Syria, Myanmar, Venezuela, and South Sudan, none of which are in Central America. These refugees have mostly tried to get safety in nearby countries. For example, millions of Syrians fled to Turkey. Venezuelans poured into Colombia. Afghans escaped war by going to Pakistan. And South Sudanese moved to Uganda. And Myanmar's Rohingya fled to Bangladesh. So among the world's top refugee hosts, we, the U.S., we aren't even close. In Lebanon, a tiny country, 1 of every 5 countries is a refugee. That's the equivalent of the United States taking in 66 million people. Yeah, under the administration of the Orange Bastard, we admitted just a few thousand people each year, which was a record low. Number 3, allowing refugees to apply for asylum isn't just a nice thing to do, it's the law. And if you want to get funky about it, it's one of the foundational requirements of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But let's stick with the legal aspect. When the U.S. signed the 1951 Convention on the Status of Refugees, Phyllis writes, it committed itself under international law to protect refugees. And according to the UN Refugee Agency, the core principle of this convention is that a refugee should not be returned to a country where they face serious threats to their life or their freedom. I mean, we signed on to this, but apparently our word doesn't mean shit. Look what happened over the past 4 years with the Orange Bastard. Anyway, that means that a desperate Honduran family showing up at the U.S. border, seeking refuge from violence or hurricanes or extreme poverty, cannot legally be either returned to Honduras or sent to, quote, wait in Mexico, end quote, for a U.S. court date, since either choice means facing those serious threats that we're not allowed to make people face because of our signing of this 1951 Convention on the Status of Refugees. It's domestic law, too. Specifically, the Refugee Act of 1980. Neither of these laws, the one from 1951 or the one from 1980, allows governments to avoid their obligations because of the pandemic. In fact, the Refugee Act, the one that was signed in this country in 1980, describes specific U.S. obligations to provide medical care to potential refugees. And today, that should mean providing vaccines and testing, ensuring social distancing and masks, and avoiding the super spreader environment of these hideously crowded detention facilities. Right? And I'm on to number 4 now. And that is, I think, the most obvious of all of these. No one chooses to lose their home. No one decides to leave their home on a lark or just because someone said President Biden will treat them better than the Orange Bastard. That's not why people leave. They make this often deadly journey, or they send their kids when they are desperate and when they feel they have no choice. Because if they stay, especially in countries in Central America, the government-protected gangs that threaten to kidnap their son or rape their mother will follow up on these threats. And because if they stay, their hurricane-destroyed crops, for example, mean their children will have nothing to eat. Or because if they stay, the bombs will fall again. Or the military actions, or the police, the militarized police, or the fascist-controlled army will swoop through their village. Now, a great many of these so-called push factors that cause people to leave their own homes, and in Central and South America to head north. I mean, where else are they going to head? A great many of these factors have been accelerated by the wars of the United States, or our trade policies, or our sanctions, or our export of weaponry, or our carbon emissions. We cannot claim innocence. I know you're tired of hearing it. So am I. I'm so goddamn sick of this. Because every single thing that this country, under this iron grip of capitalism, everything that we have done to the rest of the world over the past 120 years could have been prevented or stopped. Every single incident that involved death and disruption and chaos in other countries could have been stopped, could have been prevented, didn't have to happen. And yes, I blame capitalism and this psychotic Christian bullshit. Christian fascism. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. As you know, we've switched formats and are now broadcast exclusively on the Progressive Voices Network. So that means you get fewer program interruptions, no corporate commercials, and lots of profanity. But our format change also means some of our radio listeners no longer hear the program. It's been a while since I mentioned our podcasts, so you may have forgotten that there is a way to listen to this program anytime you need a good dose of screaming. Visit MikeMalloy.com and subscribe to our podcast. As a podcast subscriber, you can download the program to your mobile device and take me with you wherever you go. And if you have a friend who needs a dose of truth-seeking, you can give a gift subscription as well. That's MikeMalloy.com, and never miss a minute of the uncensored fun and frivolity.